Everyone remembers the time D'Angelo Russell secretly recorded Nick Young openly admitting that he had been cheating on his then fiancée Iggy Azalea many times, leading to them breaking up and everyone calling D'Angelo Russell a snitch. Let's also take a minute to remember that in this situation almost nobody blamed Nick Young here for cheating and they treated him like he was the victim, but you know. You might not remember though that after that Nick and D'Angelo stayed teammates and shared a locker room for an entire year. They rode buses together, flew on planes together, worked out together, played games together, and everything else. So for the entire 2016 and 17 season, you gotta believe this was one of the most awkward teammate pairings in NBA history. And if you haven't put it together yet, that's what we're looking at today. More instances that must have been awkward like this. This was one of the more intense cases, but there's still some pretty serious ones that are gonna make you want to cringe. And the next one's nearly as bad because a lot of people may also remember back in 2010 when LeBron still played with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Delonte West had been his teammate for a few years, and in 2010, they're playing the Celtics in the second round. In the first 3 games, LeBron's playing great. Gets up a 2-1 lead, averaging 32 a game. The next 3 games though, LeBron only averaged 21 a game on 34% shooting and loses all 3 of them in a row and the series in 6. So the rumor here was that after game 3, LeBron walked in on Delonte West and his mom making love and found out they had been seeing each other, and that's why he played so bad the rest of that series. Still to this day, nobody knows where this insane rumor started, but it happened. It was in mainstream media and everybody knew about it, and it must have been a little awkward for LeBron and Delonte West to have a conversation about it. It wasn't terrible though, because I mean pretty much after that rumor started, LeBron left to Miami, so they were never true teammates during it and didn't have to deal with it together every day. Jimmy Butler, Karl Anthony Towns, and Andrew Wiggins all did have to deal with their awkward time as teammates though. So as we know, the Wolves sucked before Jimmy Butler. He gets there, leads them to the playoffs, then completely shits on everyone there and leaves. But let's go back a little. Jimmy Butler gets to the Wolves on June 22nd, 2017. Andrew Wiggins signs a max contract 3 months later, and that's where things get started. At first, it seemed like he was happy to be going to Minnesota, but I'm sure it didn't take long for him to find out that, in his opinion, these guys didn't work hard, which was why he thought they didn't deserve big money. So Jimmy leads the team that year. The offseason comes around. He requests a trade, and 3 days later, Karl Anthony Towns signs a supermax contract, making Jimmy even more mad, but the Wolves still didn't trade him. So a month later in October, things blew up when Jimmy reportedly beat all the starters in a practice with a team of third stringers while he talked trash to them all game long. Then walked out of practice looking at Wolves GM and yelled, "You fucking need me, Scott. You can't win without me." Then there were rumors that Butler smashed Towns' girlfriend. Andrew Wiggins' brother said some stuff about Jimmy, and the entire offseason was just terrible for them. But yeah, the Wolves front office didn't trade him to start the season, so after all that, he still played 10 games with this team the next season. And can you imagine the mood in the locker room and on the court? Jimmy Butler walks by and Wiggins and Towns put their head down every time they see him. In his full season there, things had to have started getting awkward enough, but in those 10 games, I couldn't think of a worse scenario. And Butler didn't know much about those guys before joining the team, but this next one's different for LeBron and Lance Stevenson and Rajon Rondo. Starting first with Lance, over the years, James has teamed up with a player from almost every single one of his rival teams, but very few had to have been as awkward as when these two joined up. I mean, just think, how soon do you think they talked about the blowing in the ear scenario? Or if they ever talked about it, who was the one that brought it up? Did it ever happen again in practice? And did they go through every interaction with each other thinking about the ear blow and the fact that Lance pretty much tried to bully James every chance he got in those Pacers series? It must have been awkward for himself and Rondo too, remembering how much bad blood there was between those Miami Heat and Boston Celtics teams back in the day. Paul Pierce and Rajon Rondo very vocally hated LeBron James, a grudge that Paul Pierce still holds today. Rondo doesn't though, because he's teammates with the man now. But with things like pictures like this to look back on, you can only imagine that at least that first interaction had to have been very awkward. I think now they have a mutual respect for each other, but it probably took a little bit to get to that point after their past. Kobe Bryant also had 2 similar situations with his former teammates too, Matt Barnes and Ron Artest. Looking at Barnes first, on March 7th, 2010, Kobe and Barnes get into each other's faces 5 or 6 times throughout the game, followed by the legendary ball fake no flinch by Kobe. Then just 4 months later, they were teammates on the Los Angeles Lakers. Now Kobe and Barnes have both said that this moment gains respect for one another. Barnes gained respect for Kobe for being a god, and Kobe gained respect for Barnes because he went at him like he did, and that was actually the reason he recruited him to the Los Angeles Lakers. And since he recruited him, it might not have been as awkward, but you gotta think there had to have been a little bit of an adjustment period in between this, and bruh. Same thing basically happened with Ron Artest. Second round of the 2009 playoffs, the Rockets are playing the Lakers. Artest guards Bryant pretty much the whole series, and they get into it a few times. The first time they both get a tech and have to be broken up, but the second time, Kobe elbows Ron Artest near the head, and Artest runs across the court and gets in his face. And we all know things things could have gotten much worse from there. But luckily they didn't, because just a couple months later, Kobe recruits ARTEST too. And of course, again, there's a mutual respect there. But knowing you almost fought this man multiple times and now you gotta act nice to him and treat him as your leader, at least at first, you could only describe this as awkward. Especially Ron Artest, aka Metal World Peace, aka the Panda's friend, aka Elbow City. Then, alright, one more quick one for Kobe. Obviously, Kobe and SHAQ. We know their rivalry probably wasn't awkward for either of them. It was just filled with a lot of anger. But for all the teammates that were in between that and had to choose sides and which side of the locker room they wanted to be on, there couldn't have been a more awkward situation than that one. I'd include Kobe and Dwight too, but I don't really think that one was awkward. I think it was just a bad situation, not an awkward one. Speaking of Dwight though, let's take a flashback to one of the most awkward scenarios ever recorded in NBA history. April 5th, 2012. The day before, rumors came out that Dwight Howard wanted Stan Van Gundy fired as his head coach. So the next day on the 5th, reporters asked Van Gundy if the rumors are true, and he straight up says, yes, they are, and they were confirmed to me by higher ups in management that Dwight Howard wants me out. He then continues to talk about it for the next 2 minutes and eventually says, the only thing I'm ever uncomfortable with is bullshit. So to come in and deny that it's true or anything, the only thing that ever liberates me is to be honest. Some people just have a hard time with that, but to me it's a lot easier to deal with that than bullshit. And the second he finishes this sentence, Dwight Howard walks up to Stan, puts his arm around him, says, is Dave Bing here today? The guy that started this BS rumor? Stan says, I don't see him, and immediately walks out. Then Dwight's stuck in this interview. And just take a look at what happens next. Get ready to cringe.
Stan said that you wanted him fired.
I said that?
Yeah, that's what Stan said.
Who did I say that to?
According to
I don't know. I'm just telling you.
I'm asking you, since you guys got so many sources.
Yeah, so that was rough. But they continued being player and coach for 9 more days until Stan was fired. And that was the first of 2 Dwight Howard incidents that put him into awkward situations. The second happened in 2015 when this video came out of him grabbing Isaiah Cannon's junk, and I'm not even gonna make an excuse for this. There's nothing else he could have been doing or reaching for here. He's looking straight down, reaches down, grabs, Cannon freaks out, and Dwight doesn't react at all. Just moves his hand higher up to his knee. Bruh, if I'm sitting up on the bench and my teammate grabs me like that, I'm requesting a trade. And hey, that may have actually happened because 4 days later after this, Isaiah got traded away. But that's at least 4 days of awkwardness that he had to deal with. I don't think it was weird for Dwight, but it would have been 10 times weird for both players if this video had blown up like it eventually did while they were still teammates. But it didn't until much later when some other accusations of Dwight Howard being gay came up and fans dug up this video. Don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with being gay, but if you're not gay and someone just violates you like this mid-game, something's wrong. It's just weird. Then last up we have Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. And I'll admit it, there was no true visible signs of these two supposedly hating each other until Chris Paul got traded, but apparently it was pretty bad. They both had their own opinions on leadership and what everyone's role in the team should be, and it was like that for a while before things eventually blew up. Even to the point where after Chris got traded, he said Lou Williams was the new leader of the team and that he didn't appreciate Griffin while he played with him, and Blake said he didn't realize what he had in Chris Paul until he was gone. And then there was that whole thing with the Rockets trying to break into the Clippers locker room after they got into it on the court. Like, was Chris Paul gonna plan on going in there and beating up Blake Griffin? But anyways, tensions were high, and a lot of Clippers players said that back then they had to pick sides in the locker room, and you can only imagine having basically 2 separate teams back in the locker room that have to go out there and play together every night. And that didn't only make things weird for the 2 of them, but for the entire roster. But that's the most awkward teammate pairing since the 2000s. I mean, in my eyes, the worst ones here has either got to be Dwight and Stan Van Gundy or D'Angelo and Nick Young. Comment what you think is the worst though. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.